Dadperfectrevenge. I still remember exactly what Miles said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, right before everything changed. He's cute about it, really believes he's building something big. That was the moment I decided I was done staying quiet. My name is Paul Stanton. I'm 58 years old. And I'm going to tell you about the night my own daughter stood up at her anniversary party, a party I mostly paid for, and helped a room full of people laugh at me. What nobody in that room understood was that roughly half of them worked for companies I owned. Let me back up. 28 years at Harwell Industrial, senior mechanical engineer. I knew every machine on that floor, every contract, every efficiency gap that was costing the company money. I had trained half the department. I was good at what I did, and I knew it. They let me go on a Tuesday afternoon in a 12-minute meeting. The official story was restructuring. The real story was cheaper overseas labor, a new VP who wanted his own people, and a balance sheet that decided a 55-year-old with experience and opinions was more expensive than he was worth. I drove home, sat in my driveway for about 20 minutes. Then I went inside and made coffee. Here's what I decided that afternoon. I wasn't done, not even close. I had 28 years of operational knowledge that didn't disappear just because Harwell didn't want it anymore. I knew exactly how mid-size manufacturers lost money. Bad vendor contracts, bloated processes, inventory systems held together with spreadsheets and optimism. I had fixed those problems for one company for nearly 3 decades. There were hundreds of other companies with the same problems. They just didn't know the fix yet. I started DT Industrial Group out of the spare bedroom. No investors, no announcement, just me, a laptop, a whiteboard, and a list of companies I knew were running sloppy operations. First client came through an old vendor contact, paid me $4,200 for a 3-week audit. By month 6, I had 4 clients and was pulling in more monthly than my last paycheck from Harwell. By the end of year 1, the numbers told a story I hadn't dared to predict when I started. And while all of that was happening, my family was quietly deciding I was having some kind of late life episode. My daughter Lori is 32. She married Miles Donovan 5 years ago. Miles is a project manager at a mid-sized tech and manufacturing firm, Craftfield Systems. Smart enough guy. The kind of smart, though, that tips over into thinking he understands things he's only read about. From the first month I started DT Industrial, Lori treated it like a phase. Dad, are you sure you don't want to find something more stable? Like a consulting role inside one of the big firms. That was month 2. Miles thinks you might be overextending yourself. That was month 8. Miles thought a lot of things about my business that nobody asked him about. We just worry. We don't want you to get hurt if it doesn't pan out. That was year 1, after I casually mentioned I was in preliminary talks on my first acquisition. Every time I shared something real, a new contract, a growth number, a deal in progress, I got the same response. Polite nodding, a quick subject change, or worse, Miles jumping in with some entry-level advice about cash flow management or market positioning. Things I had been doing since before he knew what a P&L statement was. I stopped sharing, kept building, kept my mouth shut. There was also the matter of what happened at Harwell, something I was handling separately, quietly, the right way. During the process of acquiring 2 of my companies, my attorneys turned up documentation that Harwell had violated its own severance agreements with a group of employees let go the same year I was. Underpaid severance, clear breach of contract. I had the records, my lawyers had the filings, and we were moving through arbitration. No confrontation, no threats, just evidence and process. That part of the story wasn't dinner conversation, so nobody knew about it either. By the time Lori's 5th anniversary party rolled around, I had quietly acquired 3 companies, 140 employees on payroll, a portfolio sitting at around $15 million. DT Industrial was no longer a spare bedroom operation. It had a real office, a real team, and deals in the pipeline. Lori called me about the party 4 weeks out. She wanted help covering the venue and catering. Nice place, around 150 guests, her friends, family, and a large group of Miles's colleagues from Craftfield. I said yes without hesitating. I was her father. That's what you do. She also said, Dad, please don't bring up the business stuff tonight. Miles's boss will be there, and a lot of his colleagues. These are serious people, and I I don't want it to get weird. I told her I understood. I promised to keep quiet about work. So I put on a good shirt, drove my truck to the venue, and found my seat near the back. I had no idea what was coming, but I should have guessed that a room full of people who didn't know the truth about me was eventually going to say something that made the truth impossible to keep to myself any longer. The first hour was fine. Cocktails, handshakes, the usual small talk. I stayed close to Reed. My brother, 55, works construction, and we caught up on nothing important, which was exactly what I needed. I watched Lori and Miles work the room. She looked happy. That part was real, and I held on to it. Then Tina Rafferty took the microphone. Tina had been Lori's best friend since college. Loud, funny, the kind of person who turns any room into her audience. She was emceeing the evening, which in hindsight I should have taken as a warning. She opened strong, their love story, how they met, how Miles had proposed badly, and Lori had said yes anyway despite the terrible planning. The room laughed. It was warm and genuine. Then Tina shifted gears. Now, I do have to take a moment to talk about Lori's dad. She smiled in my direction. I smiled back. Kept my face neutral. Paul has been going through what I would call a career reinvention phase. She said it with the kind of affectionate tone people use when they're describing a child who wants to be an astronaut. He decided that 55 was the perfect age to become an entrepreneur. She paused for effect. We all think it's very brave. Light laughter around the room. I nodded politely. He keeps talking about building a business empire. More laughter. We keep gently suggesting maybe he should dial back the expectations. But you know how stubborn dads can be. That got a bigger laugh. I looked at my water glass. Then Lori stood up. I thought, for just a second, that she was going to walk it back. That she'd say something like, "Okay, but seriously, we're proud of him." That's what you hope for when it's your own kid. Instead, she leaned into the microphone and said, "Tina's being kind, honestly. My dad has fully committed to this whole CEO persona." She smiled at the crowd. He talks about acquisitions and operational strategy like he's running Goldman Sachs. We've tried to have the realistic expectations conversation more than once, but she shrugged with a laugh. He's in his era. The room went with her. Big laugh. Miles's colleagues were particularly entertained. A few of them glanced over at me with that specific look, the polite smile people give someone who doesn't know they're the joke. I sat there, smiled, breathed. Then I excused myself and walked out to the parking lot for some air. It was quiet outside. November cold, the kind that clears your head fast. I stood by my truck for a few minutes and ran the numbers in my head the way I always do when I need to steady myself. 3 companies, 140 people on payroll, $15 million. Arbitration with Harwell moving forward. 2 deals in the pipeline. None of that had required a single person in that. Building to believe in it. I went back inside. I was heading to my table when I caught a fragment of conversation near the bar. Lori was talking to one of her bridesmaids, back half turned, not watching for me. "He's just been lost since Harwell let him go," she was saying. "The whole business thing is how he copes, gives him something to feel important about." "That's actually kind of sweet," her friend said. "I mean, sure, I just hope he's not putting real money into it. Miles says the numbers probably don't add up the way Dad thinks they do." I kept walking, didn't stop, didn't let her see my face. That one landed differently than the speech. The speech was embarrassing. That conversation was something else. It was my daughter, in private, with no audience to perform for, genuinely believing that her father was a lost man running a fantasy operation to feel relevant, not malicious, just completely, utterly wrong. I sat back down at my table. Reed looked at me. "You good?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm good." About 20 minutes later, a man I didn't recognize sat down across from me. Mid-50s, broad shoulders, the kind of calm that comes from having handled real pressure for a long time. "Mr. Stanton, I don't think we've officially met. Grant Tillman, I'm Miles's direct supervisor at Craftfield." We shook hands. He had a straightforward way about him that I appreciated immediately. "Miles mentioned you're in industrial consulting," he said. "What kind of work do you do exactly?" I almost gave the deflection answer, the one I'd been giving all night, just some operational work, nothing exciting. But I was tired of performing smallness for a room that had already decided what I was. "Operational consulting and acquisitions," I said. mid-size industrial and manufacturing companies. I identify inefficiencies, restructure operations, and in some cases acquire the company outright. Tillman nodded slowly, genuinely interested, not polite interested. How long have you been running that kind of operation? About 2.5 years, full-time. And what's the name of your company? I looked at him evenly. DT Industrial Group. What happened to his face in the next 3 seconds was something I won't forget. The casual conversation expression dropped away completely. His eyes went still. Then something moved behind them. Recognition, calculation, then something close to disbelief. He set his drink down very carefully. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice had changed register entirely. "Did you say DT Industrial Group?" "That's right." A beat of silence. "You're P. Stanton," he said. Not a question anymore. The P. Stanton who acquired Apex Manufacturing in March. "Yes." He looked across the room at Miles, then back at me. And I could see him doing the math. The silence between us lasted maybe 4 seconds. Felt longer. "Miles has been working in your company's supply chain," Tillman said quietly. Still not a question. Craftfield has a subcontracting relationship with Hartfield Systems. I acquired Hartfield in January, so yes. At a few layers removed, his work touches my portfolio. Tillman was quiet for a moment. He picked up his drink, looked at it, set it back down without taking a sip. Does he know? No. Nobody here does. And I'd like to keep it that way tonight. It's my daughter's party. He nodded slowly. His jaw was working like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. I watched him look around the room, at the table of Miles's colleagues who had laughed the loudest at Tina's speech, at the guy near the bar who had spent 10 minutes giving me unsolicited advice about the importance of having a realistic exit strategy before you commit capital, at Miles himself, across the room, holding a beer and telling a story to a group of people who were hanging on every word. Then Tillman looked back at me. "Mr. Stanton, with respect, I've been sitting here all evening watching people treat you like you're someone's confused uncle who took up woodworking." His voice was steady but tight. "People who work for companies you own, I'm not sure I can just let that go." "It's one night," I said. "I've had worse. That's not the point." He leaned forward slightly. 20 minutes ago, Miles told 3 of our colleagues that his father-in-law was, and I'm quoting, cute about the whole entrepreneur thing. He said it standing 6 feet away from me. If he had any idea, he doesn't, and that's fine. Tillman studied me. "How are you this calm about it?" I thought about that for a second. Because none of it changes anything. The companies are still there Monday morning, whether these people know about them or not. He was quiet again. Then he said, "That's either the most disciplined thing I've ever heard, or you've been sitting on this all night and you're about done." I didn't answer that one. He stood up, glanced toward the front of the room where the MC setup was, then back at me. "I'm going to say something," he said. "I'll keep it factual. No drama." I looked at him for a long moment. Thought about Lori's speech, thought about standing in the parking lot in the November cold running numbers in my head just to feel steady. Thought about Lori at the bar. He's just lost since Harwell. The whole business thing is how he copes. "Keep it short," I said. He nodded once and walked toward the front of the room. The DJ was between songs. Tillman picked up the mic from the stand near the speakers. He didn't ask for attention. He just started talking, and the room went quiet on its own, because that's what happens when someone speaks with that kind of certainty. "Excuse me, I'll only take a minute." Conversations dropped off. 150 people turned to look at him. Lori's expression shifted from surprise to confusion. Miles straightened up. "My name is Grant Tillman. I'm Miles' supervisor at Craftfield, and I've had the privilege of sitting with Paul Stanton for the last little while." He paused. "I need to correct something, because I can't in good conscience let the evening end with a misunderstanding this significant. Complete quiet. Paul Stanton is the founder and CEO of DT Industrial Group. In the past 2.5 years, he has built and acquired 3 industrial companies, including Apex Manufacturing, which a number of you in this room will know by name. His current portfolio is valued at approximately $15 million. He employs around 140 people. I heard a fork hit a plate somewhere across the room. For those of you from Craftfield, Tillman's voice stayed even, DT Industrial holds an ownership stake in Hartfield Systems, which has an active subcontracting relationship with us. which means Paul Stanton is, several tiers up the chain, connected to how this company operates. He looked directly at Miles. He is not an amateur trying his hand at business. He built something real, quietly, while everyone in this room was telling him to lower his expectations. Miles had gone the color of dry concrete. Lori's hand came up slowly and covered her mouth. One of the craft field guys near the back said something to the man next to him. I couldn't hear it, but I watched the second man's face go through about 4 expressions in 2 seconds. He was the one who told me earlier that he respected the hustle and the tone people use when they mean the opposite. Tillman walked over to my table and held out the mic. I took it, stood up. The room was so quiet I could hear the ventilation system. I looked at 150 people looking at me, and I took my time. I want to be clear about one thing, I said. I didn't come here tonight to make a point. I came because my daughter asked me to, and I paid for the venue because that's what fathers do. I let that sit for a second. I kept my promise. I didn't say a word about work all night. I looked at Lori. She hadn't moved, but I need to say this once, so it's on the record. I looked at the room, and I took my time. When Tina gave her speech tonight about my career reinvention phase, I was already 18 months into my second acquisition. I kept my voice even, no heat in it, just facts. When my daughter told this room, I needed to set more realistic expectations. The payroll for 140 people had already cleared twice that month. And when Miles said I was cute about it, I paused just long enough. I had signed paperwork 3 weeks ago that runs through the same company that cuts his checks. Someone near the back let out a low breath. Not a laugh, just the sound of a room recalibrating. I'm not saying any of this to embarrass anyone. I'm saying it because I spent 2.5 years watching the people I love most decide what I was capable of before the evidence was in, and I stayed quiet. Not because I was ashamed, but because I kept thinking the work would eventually speak for itself. I looked at Lori directly. She hadn't sat down. Her arms were crossed tight. Over her chest, eyes glassy. It does now. So that's done. I set the mic back on the stand, sat down, picked up my water glass. That was it. The room took about 10 seconds to find its footing again. Then the noise came back. Not celebration, not laughter, just the sound of 150 people processing something they hadn't expected and turning to the person next to them to do it out loud. The craft field guy who'd given me the exit strategy lecture was suddenly very interested in his napkin. The man who'd told me his neighbor made crafts on Etsy, and wasn't it nice that I had something to keep me busy? He got up and went to the bar and didn't come back to the table. Miles walked over about 10 minutes later. He looked like a man who'd been asked a question he had no answer to. I didn't know, he said. I had no idea. I feel like an idiot. You made assumptions, I said. Most people do. Yeah. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, Paul. Genuinely. I nodded. Appreciate that. He stood there another moment like he wanted to say more, then thought better of it and went back to his table. That was the right call. Tillman stopped by before I left, shook my hand and held it an extra second. I hope that wasn't overstepping. It wasn't, I said. Thank you for having the spine to do it. He smiled at that, gave me his card, said he'd like to have a real conversation about what I was building. I told him I'd call Monday. Lori found me near the coat check at the end of the night. Her eyes were red, not the happy kind. Dad. She stopped a few feet away like she wasn't sure of her footing. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything tonight. I was awful to you, in front of everyone. You were wrong about the facts, I said. That's different, though it doesn't feel different, I know. She was quiet. Then, why didn't you tell me? Any of it? I looked at her. Every time I tried to share something real with you, I got a subject change or a look at Miles. After a while, you stopped trying. I kept my voice level. You told me to keep quiet about my business tonight because you didn't want it to get weird with serious people. Those serious people turned out to work for companies I own. That's not on you. You didn't know. But you made the call to protect the image before you ever asked the question. She didn't argue with that. She was sharp enough to know it was true. We'll figure this out, I said, but not tonight. Tonight was your anniversary. Let's not let this be the whole story of it. I hugged her, felt her hold on a beat longer than usual. Then I got my coat and drove home. 6 months later, things had moved. The Harwell arbitration settled in February. The documentation my attorneys had built was clean, and the other side knew it. 11 former employees received back pay on their severance violations. Nothing dramatic, no headlines, but the right outcome through the right process. That chapter closed the way I wanted it to, quietly, completely, and correctly. Miles started calling me on Sunday afternoons, not to perform, real questions about how I evaluated acquisition targets, what I looked for in an operations manager, how I thought about debt structure in a deal. He was actually sharp when he wasn't trying to look sharp. We got to something that might eventually become a real relationship. That surprised me more than anything else from that night. Reed, my brother, who spent 2 years asking why I didn't just find a stable job, started introducing me at his contractor events as my brother, who built a $15 million industrial operation from nothing at 56. I never corrected the age. Let him have the story he wanted to tell. Lori and I had 3 long conversations between January and April. Not easy ones, but honest ones. She came to my office in March, and I walked her through the whole operation. The companies, the org chart, the deals we had in the pipeline, how we made decisions. She asked good questions, real ones. That meant more to me than the party ever could have, in either direction. 3 people from the anniversary party reached out in the weeks after about consulting work. One of them turned into a real engagement. Turns out being publicly identified as the guy who built something serious while everyone assumed he was lost. That's a reputation that travels. Tillman and I met for coffee the following Monday, like I'd promised. He became one of my most reliable sounding boards over the months that followed. Some of the best professional relationships start in the strangest places. Here's what I'd tell any man my age who's in the middle of it right now. Laid off, underestimated, being told by people who love him to please be realistic. You don't need their permission. You don't need them to believe it before they see it. You don't need to announce a single thing. Build it anyway. Handle the legal stuff through lawyers and documentation, not through anger. Stay patient longer than feels reasonable. Keep your overhead modest and your focus sharp. Let the people who love you be wrong for a while, because when the proof shows up, the conversation changes. And sometimes the relationship gets more honest than it ever was before. And when someone finally says it out loud in a room full of people who didn't know, you don't have to say a word. Let someone else do that. The most powerful move a man can make at 55 isn't proving people wrong. It's making their opinion irrelevant before they even finish saying it. Nobody hands you a second act. You build it in the dark, alone, while everyone who loves you is still trying to talk you out of the first scene. Dad